Today we are back at Waldheim Cemetery to tell another family story, and today it's the Sternsteins. Simon Sternstein married Rachel Stillman. They had grown up and lived in a town called Lublin, which is in Poland, and they would have 5 sons. Now, a little bit about Lublin. If we go all the way back, archaeological finds indicate a long presence of cultures from this area. Initially, there would be a complex of settlements started to develop on the site of what would eventually become Lublin in the 6th and 7th centuries. But it was the medieval period when Lublin was more formally founded, the time between 1066 and 1485 being the medieval period. William of Normandy's triumph over King Harold at the Battle of Hastings marked the dawn of this new era. The overthrow of the Saxon Kingdom of England was to transform the country. Things would continue to progress here, of course. The Lublin Parliament session of 1569 led to the creation of a real union between the Crown Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, thus creating the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And then Lublin witnessed the early stages of Reformation in the 16th century. Now, Reformation was a major movement within Western Christianity in the 16th century in Europe, and it posed a religious and political challenge to the Catholic Church, and in particular to papal authority. Why? Well, this had arisen from what were perceived to be errors, abuses, and discrepancies by the Catholic Church. And it was the time of Martin Luther, who was the pioneer of this new Reformation. It was the start of Protestantism, and this split has developed into what is now the Roman Catholic Church. Then, between 1772 and 1795, many of the East Slavic territories became part of the Russian Empire in the course of the partitions of Poland-Lithuania. At the beginning of the 19th century, much development happened in Lublin. There were new squares, streets, and public buildings, all built very quickly. Progress was happening, and in 1877, there was a railway connection to Warsaw and also Kolev. And there constructed was the new station, Lublin Station. Well, all this spurred a mass of industrial development. Lublin's population grew from 28,900 in 1873 to over 50,150 in 1897, it was reported, which included 24,000 Jews. The year was 1915, and now things were really changing and changing quickly. Of course, that was the year Russian rule ended, and the city was occupied by German and Austro-Hungarian armies. And then we all know what happened soon after. It was a devastating time, probably the worst in all of history. In early September 1939, World War II would commence with the joint German-Soviet invasion of Poland. And I will just say that Lublin was one of the many bad places to be then for Jews. But luckily for the Sternsteins, they had already immigrated long before the World Wars. They came to the United States, and that year was 1897. Now, Benjamin and Morris Sternstein were two of their sons. Benjamin, who was born in 1877, married a woman named Ida Snatovsky. They had two children. Benjamin was a tailor by trade, and we've talked about the tailor industry in our last episode. Now, one of the other brothers who's buried here, Morris, he was born in 1887. In 1902, when he was 15 years old, he was working as a cigar maker, and he would grow to be a fine young man. He would marry a woman named Jetta Gendler. They would call her Etta, and together they had 5 sons. Sadly, one of their twin sons, Abe, died at the age of 14. It is he who is buried here next to the father and uncle, and we could find no cause of death for little Abe. But Father Morris would continue with the cigar making because it was found that in the 1920 census, when he would have been about 33 years old, he was still listed as a cigar maker. Let's talk about cigar makers of the time. But before we do that, let's go all the way back. When were cigars invented? Well, they say a Mayan ceramic pot from Guatemala dating back to the 10th century depicts people smoking tobacco leaves tied with a string. It is guessed that is the first cigar. Now, while tobacco was widely used among many of the indigenous peoples of the islands of the Caribbean, it was completely unfamiliar to Europeans before the discovery of the New World in the 15th century. Cigar smoking was first observed by European explorers when encountering the indigenous people of Cuba. Of course, Cuba, right? It was said that this discovery was made by the first scouts sent by Christopher Columbus into the interior there. Towards the end of the 18th century and into the 19th century, cigar smoking was common, while cigarettes were comparatively rare. Towards the end of the 19th century, the cigar business was an important industry, and factories employed many people before mechanical manufacturing of cigars became the norm. Cigars were made by rollers working in their homes. No, these aren't roller machines, these are people that were called rollers. It was reported that as of 1883, cigars were being manufactured in 127 apartment houses in New York, by example, employing 1,962 families and 7,924 individuals. That was a big market. And as of 1905, when Benjamin was working this trade, there were 80,000 cigar-making operations in the U.S., most of them small, most of them family-operated shops where cigars were rolled and sold. How did Benjamin make his cigars? Well, to start, tobacco leaves are harvested and aged using a curing process that combines heat and shade to reduce sugar and water content without causing the leaves to rot. This takes between 25 and 45 days depending on climatic conditions. Then there's a slow fermentation that follows, where temperature and humidity are controlled to enhance flavor, aroma, and burning characteristics. During this process, leaves are continuously moistened to prevent damage. Now, Benjamin would have taken 3 to 4 different leaves and pressed them together in his hands. He'd be folding the leaves over on themselves to form these cylinders. He would be careful to leave a narrow passage through the center of the cigar that would ensure that the cigar would draw well. But at some point in the 1930s, Benjamin had shifted his career into freight handling. We found that in the 1930 census, he was listed not as a cigar maker, but a freight loader. Now, freight loading, that was hard, backbreaking work, and you have to wonder, why did he go from cigars to freight loading? Well, he probably was making more money at freight loading, and that's what he did for some time. He'd have to be either loading rail system cars, or he might have been loading trucks or ships. Or, well, there's a slim chance he might have even been loading for airlines. They were really starting to come into fruition then. Either way, this was very strenuous work, but the good thing was he did progress and he moved up the ladder, because at the time of his death in 1941, when we checked the census, he was listed as a freight router. The census also listed that their home address was 1427 West Harrison Street in Chicago. We took a look, we went on Google Earth, and sadly their home is long gone, and it is now modern condo buildings. Well, we remember them. This is a family that lived and prospered and most probably had their share of tragedies, especially with little Abe passing when he was so young. But in the end, they contributed to the growth and advancement of Chicago. They were like so many other immigrants doing their share to help make our country what it is today. Hopefully their ancestors, their descendants, are thriving wherever they may be, and may the Sternstein family buried here rest in peace.